Well, I think we can go ahead and get started so we can get things moving because we only have an hour window for the webinar. So Margaret Pisani, as our chair of the program, please kick things off for us.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Margaret Pisani, and I am actually the vice chair of the Women in Pulmonary Advisory Council for the Chest Foundation, and that is who is supporting this webinar today, Tips and Tricks to Secure Financial Wellness. And so since these webinars and events that we've been putting on as part of the Women in Pulmonary are really due to your support. So there'll be a link in the chat if you would like to donate to support future programming for us. And so today I'd like to introduce Chloe Daniels. In 2 years, Chloe Daniels, who's the founder of Clobar Money Coach, was able to increase her net worth by $200K, all while traveling the world, drinking her lattes and never feeling deprived. Now she teaches others how to do the same and is a personal finance creator, educator, and coach, focused on helping people learn how to invest without the BS like get-rich schemes, shame, or judgment. She's taught thousands in the last year on how to improve their relationship with money and start building wealth the easy way. She's known for her reels and TikToks that provide finance tips, and she's also been featured at CNBC, Bloomberg, and Entrepreneur. She's based in Chicago and can be found on Instagram and TikTok at Chloe Bar Money Coach or at clobar.com. And so I'm really pleased to welcome you, Chloe, today. I had the opportunity to work with you when you were at Chest, and I'm glad to see you back and on your new adventure. So welcome.
Thank you. It's super exciting for me to be here. Like Angela said, Women in Pulmonary was my baby. And I remember when I was leaving, I was like, you can't let this go. It's got to stay alive because it was so important to me. So thank you guys so much for having me today. And I'm excited to teach you guys some tricks and tips on managing your finances. So let me share my screen real quick. Money 101 today. Can everyone see my screen all right? Let me know in the chat. Okay, I see some heads nodding. So of course I had to throw up some photos of me and Angela working together back in the day. This was us in Washington, DC. And then this was me with Rudy and John Studdard actually on my last day. So like I said, it is so cool to be back and teaching you guys about my true passion, which is personal finance. So first, I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for being here. I know time is precious and it's our most valuable resource. So I'm super excited to be able to provide you with some education today. And thanks for taking time on your busy schedules to be here. So go ahead and type in the chat box, what is your biggest money challenge that you're facing today? Is it budgeting? Is it learning how to invest? Is it paying off debt? A little bit of everything, or just yes? Let us know in the chat box, and hopefully we'll address some of those things today. So I'll give it a second while folks are typing. Student loans from Red School. I knew that was coming. Learn how to invest, budgeting and investing, learning how to invest. The reason I like to ask this question in the beginning is because I want to open it up and make sure everyone realizes we're all dealing with the same stuff when it comes to learning about our finances. That's why my approach is really focused on I don't want anybody to feel shame around their finances. It's not something that we were born with doing. So feel free to ask all the questions. We are going to have time for a Q&A at the end. So I would recommend holding questions till the end so it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. But today I'm going to share with you 3 key tips for financial wellness, which will hopefully address some of the issues that you guys are facing today. So first, why should you listen to me? Most of you probably don't know who I am. So I'm Chloe. In the last 2 years, as Margaret said, I've actually taught thousands of folks how to start building wealth the lazy way. So you can find me on Instagram at Clobar Money Coach or on TikTok at Clobar Money Coach. You'll see a lot of really bad dance moves, sharing personal finance tips on the daily. So you also may have heard of some of these publications. I've been featured in a lot of publications, but the real important thing here is actually I was able to increase my net worth by $300K in 3 years. So I'm now on track to actually retire with millions in the bank, even if I don't invest another dollar. But it was not always this way. Just a few years ago, I didn't know the first thing about what the heck a 401k was, let alone what I was invested in. So what I wanted to share right here, this is like my blog. I don't blog all that much anymore, but I actually started off as a mental health blogger while I was still at Chest. And I shared this post on October 15th, 2018 to share hey, I'm $70,000 in debt. And that was in October 2018. At the time, I had no emergency savings. I had no cash on hand, and I lived paycheck to paycheck despite making a pretty decent salary. I had about $10,000 in my 401k, and I had, like I said, no idea what it was invested in. And like many of my millennial peers, I kind of thought I would never retire. I just thought retiring was something that was for other people. Let me know if you've ever thought the same thing in the chat box. But then I got a job that changed everything for me. It totally changed my perspective because I got a pay increase that gave me about a $20,000 pay increase all of a sudden. And what I realized is if I did not learn how to manage that money, I was going to blow through it just like I had every other pay increase that I had had along the way. Because at the end of the day, I had started when I was living in Chicago. When I first moved there, I'd started making about $42,000 a year. And every single year from 2015 till now, I was making more and more money. But for some reason, I was always living paycheck to paycheck and never able to save more. And I kept telling myself, oh, I just need to make a little bit more money and then I'll finally be able to save. Then I'll finally be able to invest. But that just never happened for me. So when I got this new job, I decided to change, or at least attempt to change. And in the last 3.5 years, as I've already said, I was able to pay off more than $50,000 of debt, saved more than $200,000 for retirement, and increased my net worth by that $300,000. So not only that, I've traveled the world solo, done all the therapy, climbed the corporate ladder, but getting my money right was one of the most empowering things I've ever done for myself. And that is why I teach today. So today we're going to go through the top 3 things that you can do to get your finances right. So the first one's going to be find out where your money is going. Second, setting up an emergency fund. And 3, investing for retirement. So I do have a goal to have about 40 or 20 minutes of Q&A at the end. So we're going to move a little bit fast, but please take screenshots. Feel free. I know this is going to be recorded, so you'll get the recording as well. But if you want to take screenshots, that's totally fine as well. So tip number 1, find out where your money is going. This may seem like a basic no-brainer, but tell me in the chat box, how many of you find yourself asking yourself, where did all my money go at the end of the month? I know for sure I was asking that question for like years. Hit yes in the chat box if that's something that resonates with you. Angela, this girl right here every day. Anybody else? Or is it just us? Yes, definitely, all the time. Taxes is a huge one for sure. So that was absolutely me, like I said. Year after year, no matter how much money I made, I never seemed to be able to save anything until one day I decided to do an experiment. I tracked every dollar I spent for 2 weeks. And when I decided to start this experiment, I thought it was such a crazy idea. I was like, who tracks where their money is going? But I discovered so much by doing this, and I was completely blown away by what I found. I was spending about $600 every 2 weeks on eating out and drinking. And I was totally horrified, but doing this made me realize 2 very important things. 1, I had money. It was just not going to the places that I actually valued. And 2, my money was not at all aligned with my values. So action item number 1. Now, this is not a workshop. This is just kind of a chat. So again, you'll want to take screenshots because this is something you're going to want to do on your own time. But the first thing I recommend doing when you're starting out on this path is get very clear on what you value. So make a list. I say start with like the top 5 things that you value the most. And the reason is to give you some context as to why is we want our money going to the things that provide us with the most value. So for me, I was so horrified by the money that I was spending on eating out and drinking and going out and things like that, because I wanted my money going to other things. I wanted my money going to travel. I wanted my money going to financial independence. I wanted my money going to spending time with my family and friends. I didn't want to be bleeding $600 every 2 weeks going to things that didn't actually provide me with value. Yes, eating out and getting cocktails and things like that is fun, But when I looked at my whole life and what I really wanted out of my life, those weren't like the top 2 things that I wanted out of my life. So for you, get very clear on what are those things. And to kind of think about it, you can make it very, very concrete. You can make it very specific, like I value grocery delivery. I value, hiring a nanny. I value whatever those things are. Or you can get very abstract with it. I value financial independence, because what are those things to you? Maybe that means that you're going to be paying off your debt. Maybe you're going to prioritize, putting money into your Roth IRA. Whatever those things are to you, get very clear and write that down. The second thing is on the flip side. A lot of people stop at the what do I not value or what do I value, but they don't go the extra step to get very clear on what you don't value. Now, this may come out to you once you start reviewing your spending, but the reason it's important for you to get very clear on what you don't value is because these are going to be the things we're going to try to cut back ruthlessly on in order to make more space for the things that do bring us that joy, that do bring us that value. It's kind of like Marie Kondoing your finances, is getting very clear on what brings you joy and cutting back ruthlessly on the things that don't bring you joy. So for me, that was ordering takeout, expensive cocktails, having nice cars, and most things beauty related. But you're going to want to have those 2 key lists, because we want to find resources to dedicate more money to the things that bring us the most value. Now, this is the part that I recommend everybody does, but this is the part that everyone wants to skip. So go through your spending. Now, you can do what I did. I literally had like a little chest foundation notebook, funny enough, that I wrote down every single week or every day what I was spending my money on. You don't have to do it that way. For me, it was kind of a nice way to get more mindful about my spending. But even if you're printing off your statements for the last 30 days, or you're printing off your credit card statements for the last 30 days, and you're having like a wine night with your friends, and you're going through and you guys are circling your categories and figuring out exactly where your money is going, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do this, because this is going to show you exactly where your money is going. I have coached hundreds and hundreds of people who, when we get to this part of the session, they're like, I know where my money is going. But every time we actually go through their finances and we go through their spending, there are surprises. There are things that they're like, wow, I would have never guessed I was actually spending that much on eating out, or I would never have guessed I was spending that much on clothes, or I never would have guessed I was spending that much money on whatever it is. So I highly, highly, highly recommend not skipping this step. This is an incredibly important step. Now, why do we do this? Because as I said, we need to know where our money is going. Now, every time I do this, I always get somebody, I don't think I've ever had a coaching session where somebody's like, oh yeah, it wasn't an expensive month. It was a really frugal month, when they come to me and we're ready to go through their last 30 days. Even if it's an expensive month, that's okay. The thing is, at the end of the day, every month's gonna have something. Maybe it's kids' tuition one month, or maybe it's Christmas another month, or maybe it's some wedding the next month. There's always going to be something. So even if it felt like an expensive month, that's okay. That's still just going to give us an idea of where your money went for the last 30 days, so that you can start deciding where you want your money to go. The thing is, if we don't decide where we want our money to go, it's just going to go wherever the heck it wants. We have to recognize that money is a tool, and we get to decide where it's going to go. Okay, then after you have done this, we are going to make some goals. And I have actually got a little freebie for you to help you do this. So right here, let me drop this in the chat box. I've got, let me move this back over. I just dropped, I didn't press enter. That's probably helpful. There you go. So I just dropped this spreadsheet here into the chat box. It is a Google sheet. So what I want you to do is go to File, Make a Copy. Do not request edit access. Go to File, Make a Copy. Now, what you're going to do with this is, after you've gone through your spending, after you've seen everything, you're going to go in and you're going to fill this out. So you're going to write in there, okay, here's all of my fixed expenses. These are the things that I'm spending every month on fixed expenses. So you'll list those out. At the top here, I skipped that. At the top, that's where you'll put your total monthly income. This is your take-home pay. This is the stuff that you are getting in your paycheck. You're going to put that right there. And then you're not going to edit anything that's in purple. The stuff that's in purple is going to automatically populate based off of what you put in the blue sections. Okay. So don't change that. That'll mess up your spreadsheet. If you mess it up, you can always email me and I'll fix it for you. But in here, you're going to go through, you're going to put all your fixed expenses. These are the expenses that don't really change every month. So your mortgage, your debt payments, your utilities, your cell phone, your car payment, all of these things, your donations, things like that. And then down here, you're going to have a discretionary expenses category as well. This is where you can go in after collecting the data that you gathered from going through the last 30 days of your spending. You're going to look at each category and be like, wow, I spent $500 on eating out last month. What do I think is reasonable? What do I think is a reasonable amount to be spending every month? And the reason I say reasonable is because I don't want you to go to the other extreme. If you're spending $500 a month on eating out and that's a normal month for you, going all the way to like, I'm only going to spend $50 a month on eating out is not reasonable. That's not going to set you up for success. And what we want to do is create a livable goal, a livable spending plan for you so that you can actually stick to it. Because if you set unreasonable expectations for yourself, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to quit, and you're going to say, why do I even try this budgeting thing in the first place? So that is what I recommend. Get very reasonable with your budget and your spending. Now, one thing that you'll see, can you guys all see the spreadsheet when I shared on this page? Because I think I shared my whole desktop. Tell me yes in the chat if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it, Chloe.
Okay, cool. So then after you go through and you put in your discretionary expenses, you guys can change these categories to anything you want once you've done file, make a copy. But down here, you'll also have your savings category. So we've all got a lot of different things that we're saving for, right? Whether that's vacation, whether that's sinking fund, whether that's the emergency fund, whatever. You're also going to put that in here as well. Now, at the bottom, that will populate and let you know what you have left over a month to invest. Or you can always, if it's not investing, you can always, this is the extra that you have for putting on debt or the extra that you have for savings. Generally, the available to invest is what I use this to teach with, but this will give you at least a very good idea of where your money is going and what you have available to spend at the end of the month or put elsewhere. Okay. So that's that spreadsheet. So after you've made those goals, and this is a very important step, it is time for the B word, a budget. So if you don't like the word budget, I know it's a trigger for a lot of people. You can also use the word spending plan. But I do recommend that folks try a spending plan or a budget for at least 90 days. And I always recommend the zero-based budget because the zero-based budget is essentially identifying every dollar that's coming in a month. And this is post-tax. So if you're counting the 401k, somebody asked, are you counting the 401k or 457 or 403b in the spreadsheet? No, this is your post-tax dollars. This is your post deductions, post all of that. This is what you get in your bank account every month. But the reason I recommend a budget, at least for 90 days, is because we are trying to get you into the habit of thinking about your money more. Instead of just wondering where it went at the end of the month, every month, we want to get a very clear idea of where it's going, and we want to feel that control over where our money is going. So that is why I recommend a spending plan. Now, this, in 40 minutes, we don't have enough time to go over how to actually create a spending plan or a budget. So what I've got for you is a free guide here, dropping it into the chat box. This will have my budgeting template that I've used for the last 4 years, as well as those videos that will walk you through how to actually use it, as well as like a step-by-step guide. So get that free guide in that link there, and that will walk you through not only the budgeting template, but also instructions on how to create that. Okay. Tip number 2, I could not have a finance session without talking about emergency funds. So please, 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 if you do not have an emergency fund, I personally think that should be one of your #1 priorities, even if you're working with debt. The reason is because the easiest way for us to get out of high interest debt is to never get into high interest debt in the first place. And the thing is, we can also pretty much count on things happening. Things happen all of the time. Credit cards are totally fine. Let me get that out there first, as long as we're paying them off every month. But what happens if we lose our job or we can't work due to extenuating life circumstances, or, there's a freaking pandemic going on and things like that? Having a cash fund will help you avoid that crushing credit card debt that is so hard to pay off because of the high interest credit card interest rates. So how much should you save? Generally, we're recommending 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. Now, these are your emergency expenses. So with that spreadsheet that I just gave you guys, you can always go file, make a copy, and then you can go in, okay, these are my emergency expenses every month. These are the things that if I wasn't bringing an income, if I didn't have any money coming in, these are the things that I would still have to pay for every single month. So go through and make sure you've got that ramen noodle number, that like if I wasn't bringing in money in. But 3 to 6 months, usually 3 months is recommended if it's a 2-income household. If it's a 1-income household, usually we recommend 6 months of worth of emergency expenses being the key word. Now, this is money that we're not touching for, travel or a new TV or whatever it is. And so what I usually recommend with emergency funds is move that over into a separate bank account. Specifically, I really like high yield savings accounts. If you haven't heard of a high yield savings accounts before, a high yield savings account is pretty much the same thing as a regular savings account, except they're only online usually. There's some banks will also provide them, but generally, because there are no brick and mortar locations, the banks actually pass on the savings from not having those brick and mortar locations to you in the form of interest. Now, your regular savings account may offer you about 0.01 to 0.04% on your savings, but a high yield savings account right now, they're offering about 0.5% on your interest. And yes, that's not going to make you rich overnight, but it's nice to have, your money earning you dollars rather than earning you pennies. Now, these will likely go up when the federal interest rates go up as well. So that's also important to keep in mind. My personal favorites for high yield savings account is Ally, which is ALLY, or YOTTA, which is YOTTA. But if you're getting a high yield savings account, really the only things that you need to keep in mind is that make sure it's an FDIC insured bank, make sure there's no minimums, make sure there are no fees. But also keep in mind that once you switch to a high yield savings account for your emergency fund, you're not likely going to get a debit card or a bank card to it. You've got to keep your regular bank account to transfer money in and out of. And then you can also only transfer money out of the high yield savings account about 6 times a month. If you do it more than 6 times a month, you'll be charged a fee. And that's with pretty much any high yield savings account out there. But again, my 2 favorites are YOTTA and Ally. So the action item, the takeaway from this particular tip is use that spreadsheet, make a copy of that spreadsheet to go to your bare bones budget to see what would I have no option but to spend my money on if I lost my income. Then when you get that number at the end, when you see the total amount of money that you are spending for this time period, they'll calculate at the top of each category, multiply that by 3 or 6, depending on what your emergency fund goal is. Okay, and tip number 3, invest for retirement. Now, how many of you hit yes in the chat box? How many of you hoard money in a savings account or a checking account? The reason I ask this is because a lot of women specifically have a tendency to do this because we're afraid to start investing or we don't have the information to start investing. So it's a pretty normal thing that I see specifically with women, but obviously men do it as well. I love it. Again, right here. So the reason we want to get out of this is because it's not really an effective place for us to keep our money. We want our money to make money for us. And when I say this money, this is money that we are not saving for our emergency fund or any short-term savings goals. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that in the Q&A. But I want to highlight that if you saved $1,000 a month in a high yield savings account, so that's assuming that you're getting 0.5% interest, and you did that for 40 years, you would have about $500,000 saved at the end of that 40 years. Now, if you were investing $1,000 a month and you were getting an average 10% annual return, you would have about $5.36 million in 40 years. That is the same money that you are putting to work. It's the same amount of money. You're either putting $1,000 in a savings account or you're putting it in your investments. but look at the impact that investing can have versus just keeping money in cash. Now, you cannot save your way to wealth. Investing is really a requirement to that, but I know a lot of you are probably thinking, but Chloe, what if I have debt? Now, I personally think that you should be investing even with debt, like especially your 401k, 403b, 457 match. That should be like a no-brainer. You should be getting that pretty much no matter what. But I want to highlight a very basic example to kind of run the numbers for you to get an idea of how the impact of waiting to invest can impact your overall investments for retirement. Now, this is a very basic example. Obviously, it depends on the interest rate of your debt, but I want to just show you this basic example to highlight it. So let's say you have an extra $500 a month and a 30-year time horizon to either put that extra $500 a month on debt or to invest. Now, remember, this is extra. We're still paying the minimums no matter what. Let's say you use all of that $500 a month to pay off your debt, and then you'll be debt-free in 3 years with $0 in investments. You then, after 3 years, we now have 27 years left to invest. Then we decide, okay, I'm going to take that $500 and now I'm going to invest it. And I have 27 years left to invest it. You would have about $726,000 at the end of that time frame. Obviously, it depends on what your returns are, but that's assuming an average of 10% a year. Now, let's say we decided, you know what, I'm going to keep paying the minimums on my low interest debt. I'm not going to pay this off early. Instead, I'm going to use that extra $500 a month for the next 30 years to invest it instead. Still paying down my debt and things like that, but this extra money, I'm going to invest it. Since you didn't wait 3 years, you now have a full 30 years to invest that money. And at the end of that 30 years, you would have closer to $995,000 invested. So that's a $269,000 difference. But what I always like to say is there are loans for school, but there are no loans for retirement. So we need to be preparing for your retirement as well. Now, one of the first things that gets people confused when it comes to investing is the accounts. So what I wanted to go over today was a brief overview of the different account types, and then a brief overview of some investment options, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. So the Roth IRA is a fantastic account. It's one of the favorite accounts in the financial independence community, but a Roth IRA is really cool in that a Roth IRA, and all of these accounts, I should say first, these are all accounts. These are not investments themselves. A lot of folks hear Roth IRA and they think that is an investment. When I put my money in, it's going to automatically grow. That is not true. It is just a holding container for your investments. You put the money in and then you have to go buy investments. So if you have a Roth IRA and you're not sure you're invested, make sure today after this call to immediately log in and make sure you're invested. Okay. So a Roth IRA, what's really cool about a Roth IRA is that the money that you put in is post-tax, which means if you put in $6,000, it came from your bank account, it came from the money you already have on hand. So you've already paid income taxes on that. That means that that money then grows tax-free for the rest of your life. What's also cool about that is that you can take contributions that you put into the Roth IRA, you can take them out at any time. Now, that's contributions. So contributions are defined as the money you put into a Roth IRA. Once you put that $6,000 in and it grows to $100,000, then you have $6,000 of contributions and $94,000 of earnings. The earnings you cannot access until you're 59.5 years old. So keep that in mind. If you access it before then you have to pay a 10% penalty as well as taxes. So that is the Roth IRA. It's one of the most flexible retirement accounts that are out there. Now, a regular IRA, also known as a traditional IRA, are usually post-tax contributions. They can be deductible or non-deductible, but we won't get into the complications of that yet. The money, because it's still post-tax contributions, you don't ever have to pay taxes on the money you put in again. But when that money, that $6,000 that you put in grows to $100,000, you then have that $94,000 of earnings that you will eventually have to pay taxes on. So remember, Roth IRA, you don't ever have to pay taxes again as long as you follow the rules. But a regular traditional IRA, that money is tax deferred money, meaning you're going to eventually have a tax bill when you take out that money out in retirement. Now, if you have $100,000 in there, you're not going to have to pay $100,000 or taxes on $100,000 the day you retire. It's whatever you pull out every year. It's taxable income. But unlike with a Roth IRA, where you can access the money you put in at any time, you cannot access the money in an IRA at all until you're 59 and a half years old. So it's still a great account because the money grows tax deferred, but it's not nearly as exciting as our Roth IRA accounts. The 401k, 403b, 457, they kind of all fall in the similar bucket. Usually 401ks are pre-tax. So the money goes in out of your paycheck before you ever receive the money. So you didn't actually pay taxes on that money. So that's called pre-tax contributions. Now, some employers have Roth 401ks. So then Roth, if you hear the word Roth, just think this is post-tax dollars. So if you have a Roth 401k, then that money grows tax-free for the rest of your life. With a 401k, traditional 401k, that money grows tax deferred, just like the taxable IRA or the traditional IRA. Now, with the 401k, you have not paid taxes on anything. So all of the money that you pull out in retirement, you will have to pay taxes on. And same with this 401k, whether it's a Roth or a traditional 401k, you cannot access money till 59 and a half. Now, reminder, in your 401k, it's a container. You buy investments in the 401k. Usually they're target date funds, and we'll talk about those here in a little bit. Now, the other option out there is just a regular taxable brokerage account. So probably a lot of you guys have heard of Robinhood or Acorns or Stash or all these other brokerages out there. These are just regular brokerage accounts that don't have all the restrictions of retirement accounts because they don't have all those beautiful tax savings that we've got in our 401ks and our IRAs and things like that. So anybody can open up a brokerage. The money goes in post-tax. It's money that you're putting in out of your paycheck. And then the money that's you're earning, if you put in $6,000 and it turns into $94,000, that gets taxed yearly if you're realizing it. So if you let's say you buy Apple stock for $100 and you sell it for $200, you've just made a $100 capital gain. That if you sell that within whatever time frame, whenever you sell that and you make that capital gain, you got to report that on as income, just like you would anything else that you've got to report as income. A lot of stocks and funds and things like that also pay dividends, which are basically a payment that says, hey, thanks for holding on to our stock. Those also get taxed yearly when it's inside of a taxable brokerage account. If you're making capital gains and dividends inside of an IRA, a Roth IRA, or a 401k, that's not going to be reportable as taxable income every year. It's just something that if you're in a regular traditional account, you'll have to pay taxes on it in retirement, or if it's in a Roth account, you'll never have to pay taxes on it. But the nice thing about a taxable brokerage specifically is that you can really access that money at any time. Now, this is a great one for you to screenshot because I know that was probably like drinking from a fire hose if you've never heard this information before. So this screen specifically just summarize it. So feel free to take a quick screenshot of that. Okay. Moving on, investment priorities. If you're wondering like, okay, with all these different accounts out there, how do I know what to prioritize first? This is my preferred route in order to get the most amount of tax savings there is out there. Get that company match pretty much no matter what, even if you've got that high interest debt, even if you've got regular debt, then focus on maxing out these tax advantaged accounts before you go straight to a taxable brokerage. Usually people do it in the reverse. They go straight to the Robinhoods of the world because those are heavily marketed towards us. But really, if you want to be maximizing your tax-free growth and your tax-deferred growth and saving as much money on taxes as possible, you're going to want to focus on those tax advantage accounts first. And then when you've done that and you have more money available to invest, then you can move into those taxable brokerage accounts. Okay. Real quick, we're going to go through a couple of different things for you to consider when picking your investments, and then we'll dive into the Q&A. So I am a big believer of investing in funds versus investing in individual investments like stocks or individual bonds. So the funds, the way I like to think about it is when you're buying an individual stock, when you're buying a share of Apple, or when you're buying a share of Amazon, you're buying like one chocolate bar. You get one thing that stock, that chocolate bar. When you buy a fund, you're getting an entire box of chocolates. It's got a bunch of different stocks inside of it, a bunch of different bonds inside of it. It's kind of also like if you were trying to find a needle in a haystack with the chocolate bar with the individual stocks, or buying the whole haystack with the box of chocolates. So let's talk about these. There's really three main types of funds, so we're going to go through them quickly, but mutual funds are usually the funds people think of first. And there are two main types of mutual funds. There are actively managed mutual funds, and then there are passively managed mutual funds. Keep in mind, these are all boxes of chocolates. So actively managed mutual funds, these are when someone is actually inside of the fund. You are paying somebody to manage the fund and to trade inside of the fund to make the investor as much money as possible, which sounds great. But unfortunately, a lot of the times these actively managed mutual funds fail to do as well as the passively managed mutual funds on the other end. The pros of actively managed mutual funds is that they are diversified and they can beat the market in the short term, but the cons are that you're paying a higher fee because you have to pay someone's salary in order for them to be inside of this fund trading every day. And like I said, they often do not beat the market in the long term. Passively managed mutual funds, these are my favorite. These are like the bread and butter of what I teach. These are also known as index funds. So passively managed mutual funds, still a box of chocolates, still tons of different stocks inside of them, but these are actually designed to mirror an index like the S&P 500. So index, what is an index? Index is just a very fancy word for a grouping of stocks. So the S&P 500 is a grouping of the 500 largest stocks in the US. When you purchase an S&P 500 index fund, you are essentially purchasing all 500 of the stocks that are inside of the S&P 500 for one price. Now, because these are passively managed, meaning no one's inside of there trading every day, the fees on these index funds are much lower. And the thing is that you'll learn as the more you learn about investing is that it is incredibly hard to beat the market. So let's say the entire stock market returned 10% last year. It's really hard to do better than 10%. A lot of people think they can do it, and a lot of times they're proven wrong. But what's nice about index funds is that you are getting a guarantee that your investment is going to perform how the market it's mirroring is performing. So if the S&P 500 returns 10% one year, that S&P 500 index fund is going to return 10% in that same year. So the cons of it is that they're not going to beat the market. If you have an S&P 500 index fund and it returns 10%, your S&P, or if the S&P 500 returns 10%, your S&P 500 index fund isn't just all of a sudden going to return 20% or something along those lines. It's going to do what the S&P 500 is doing. So as I said as well, what's also nice about these, not only are they easy and low cost and diversified, but they also often outperform actively managed mutual funds over the long term. So those folks who are actively trading inside those boxes of chocolates and buying and selling every day, they're actually not doing as well as these index funds that are designed to perform according to the market. So really a win-win on index funds. So I just wanted to show you some index fund examples because, you know, when you go in and you look at your 401k or you look at your Roth IRA, sometimes it's hard to see what you're looking at. And obviously we can't do a deep dive today, but if you notice each one of these funds, notice the word index is inside of each of these fund descriptions, the fund titles, and you can kind of tell what is this fund mirroring. Right here, Fidelity 500 Index Fund, it's mirroring the S&P 500. The Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, this is mirroring the total US stock market. So this fund has thousands of stocks inside of it because it's performing how the entire US stock market is performing. The Vanguard Russell 2000 Index Fund, it is mirroring the Russell 2000. And then notice down here, you'll see these expense ratios. You're paying very little in expenses, where when you're doing actively managed mutual funds, sometimes you'll see expenses all the way up to 1%. When you're looking at index funds, a lot of them are at like 0.015, 0.04, 0.08, so very, very low. These are just a couple of examples of indexes. There are tons of indexes out there. These are probably the most popular. So we've already talked about the S&P 500, 500, the largest publicly traded stocks inside of it. The Dow Jones has been used as a representative sampling as the entire US stock market. It's got 30 large publicly traded companies inside of it. And then the NASDAQ is very heavy in technology, and it's got about 3,000 publicly traded companies inside of it. Okay, one more type I want to share with you guys before we go into Q&A is target date funds. The reason is because these are really, really easy wins. If you're getting off this call today and you're like, holy crap, that was so much information, I have no idea what I'm supposed to invest in. Target date funds make it very easy for you. And most of you probably have access to target date funds inside of your 401k or 403b. So target date funds are funds of funds, which means they contain many different funds and stocks and bonds and things inside of them. What's cool about them is that, let's say you want to retire in the year 2060. You can literally pick target date fund 2060, and it's going to have all of these things inside of it. So it's got the total US stock market, the total international market, and a ton of different bonds inside of it as well. What's neat about that is you didn't have to do anything. All you had to do is pick the date, and then this target date fund is slowly going to reallocate its investments inside of here the closer you get to retirement. So for example, you'll notice the 2030 fund, this one over here, the 2060 fund, it's got like 90+% stocks inside of it, and the rest is in bonds. That's because bonds are really used for wealth preservation. And so if you've got 40 years before you plan to retire, you don't want a lot of bonds in your portfolio. You want to be more invested in stocks. So that's why you'll see a much heavier emphasis on stocks in this. But then 2030, we're like 8 years away from retirement. So we've got a much heftier portion of bonds inside of this portfolio. We've got about 25% of bonds inside of this portfolio. If you had bought 2030 40 years ago, it would have looked a lot like a 2060 fund does right now. But now that it's ticked away, it's made it to 2022, this fund has slowly reallocated, and you didn't have to do anything. You have a whole portfolio inside of here working for you and essentially reallocating according to your time frame. So that makes investing pretty easy, especially for newbies. Okay, so I know that was a lot. I know I can't teach you everything there is to know about investing in 15 minutes. So I also wanted to invite you all to my free investing class next week. I've got an investing class coming up on March 14th. You can get at it at thelazyinvestorscourse.com/webinar. If you can't make it that time, everyone who registers will receive a replay where you can watch the recording. But we'll go into, it's a 2-hour webinar with an hour for questions. So you can get some of your investing questions answered in that class. But that's pretty much all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for your time and all you do. And if you ever want to connect, if you ever have questions, if you want to reach out, here's how to get a hold of me. But let's dive into the Q&A. Okay, I see people are already putting questions in the Q&A, which is fantastic. You're so welcome. I hope that was helpful. I know it was a lot of information in a very short period of time, but I wanted it to be valuable to you all. Okay, for short-term goals, where should you invest or place your money? Just an example of places to put it. So it depends on the time frame. So if you are looking at a time frame of less than 5 years, investing in 5 years with a 5-year time horizon is a really short time horizon. When you're investing that short period of time, it's really, really difficult to do it in a way that's not risky. One way you could do it if you really wanted to invest it is you could be putting it in a heavy emphasis on bonds with some stocks in there, but maybe like a 60-40 split between 60% stocks and 40% bonds. But it all really depends on your time horizon and your risk preference, because you may be like, you know what, I'm feeling the risk, I'm feeling excited about this, and I want to do this, and I feel comfortable knowing the risks involved in investing in such a short time frame. But generally for me, I'm 30 years old. I don't really like to take a ton of risk with my money. I do have a 100% stock portfolio for the most part, but if it were me and it was less than 5 years, any short-term savings, like saving for a house or saving for a car or whatever, I would put that in the high yield savings account that I was talking about. So that's my own personal preference. Are there target date funds not for retirement, but you can buy from a brokerage account? Yes. So target date funds, you can buy in an IRA account, you can buy in a taxable brokerage account. So like if you go to Vanguard and you go to their list of funds, they have an entire list of their target date funds. All you got to do is type in Vanguard index funds and they'll come up with a whole list. Like if you just Google Vanguard index funds, they'll come up with a whole list of all their different index funds out there, and they'll have an entire list of all their target date funds. If you're like 20 years old and you're like, okay, I know my retirement date's 2016, but I want to invest some of this money to buy a house in 10 years, you could go in and pick a 2040 fund or a 2030 fund in order to still get that advantage of a target date fund, you know, being managed and you not having to worry about it, especially if you don't know what you're doing. But the nice thing about target date funds is they don't necessarily tie it up for you. So yes, they have that date. They've got the 2030 date, but if you wanted to access that money beforehand and it was in a taxable brokerage account, you can access that money at any time. So it's not like, oh, I picked 2060, I can't access this money until 2060. You can actually access that money in at any time, as long as it's in the right account. If it's in an IRA, you can't access that money till retirement. If it's in a 401k, you can't access that money till retirement. But if it's in a taxable brokerage account, then you're good. You're good to go. Can anyone open a Roth IRA even if they have maximized their 403b and 457? Is there a max contribution limit to an IRA? So yes, anyone can open a Roth IRA, but there are stipulations. There are income limits. So if you make above, I can't remember what the income limits are this year, but I believe it's like around $68,000 if you're a single filer. If you make above that income limit, and you can just do quick Google search to fact check me on what the actual income limit is, you cannot contribute directly to a Roth IRA. You have to do what's called a backdoor Roth IRA. So a backdoor Roth IRA, if you're considering doing that and you have other IRAs out there, let's say you also have a traditional IRA or you have a rollover IRA out there, definitely you're going to want to work with a CPA to do that because it gets a little bit complicated. But if you're brand new, you don't have any other IRAs, this is like your first time doing it, a backdoor Roth IRA is a legal loophole that allows you to contribute to a Roth IRA even if you're above those income limits. So what you would do is however much you wanted to put into your Roth IRA, let's say you wanted to max it out, you would first put it into a traditional IRA. And then once that money becomes available, you would convert it. And Vanguard literally has a button for you to do this on their brokerage, but you would literally convert it to a Roth IRA, and then it just converts into the Roth IRA and boom, you've got it inside of the Roth IRA. So again, if you have rollover IRAs or traditional IRAs or other IRAs that already exist, you're going to want to talk to a CPA before doing that. But if this is your first time doing it, you really shouldn't have any issues. The max contribution limit to a Roth IRA is $6,000. Same with if you're above the age of 50, you can do $7,000. And same with a traditional IRA, it's $6,000 as well, or $7,000 if you're over the age of 50. Somebody else asked, what's the benefit of a 453B? Do you mean a 403B? I don't know what a 453B is. I'm assuming you mean a 403B, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. A 403B is very similar to a 401k. So the biggest difference is, I'm guessing most of you probably have 403Bs, but usually your employer will still give you a match, but 403Bs are usually for nonprofits and hospitals and schools. So there's not a huge difference between a 403B and a 401k. It's the biggest difference comes when you're working at like a K through 12 school, because they're not IRSA regulated, but that doesn't really impact, I'm guessing, most of you guys. But yeah, they'll still have, most of them have target date funds inside of them. Usually they're pre-tax, and the money grows tax deferred as well. A 457. So a 457 is different. A 457, I mean, it's similar in that you've got usually an employer match, or you've got that it's usually a traditional in that it's tax deferred growth. It's not the Roth growth. They may offer a Roth option, but what's cool about a 457, 457s are like really cool, and they're kind of rare to find a company that offers you a 457. But what's cool is you can still contribute to a 401k or a 403b and a 457. So you can put away a ton of money that's pre-tax, that's tax deferred. But what's particularly cool about a 457 is that there's a rule with 401ks and 403bs where you can't access that money early. There's an early withdrawal penalty. So if you access the money in your 401k or your 403b before the age of 59 and a half, you will have to pay a 10% penalty. 457s don't have that penalty. So that's really cool. So if you've got access to a 457, I would say take advantage of it, especially if you think you might want to retire before the age of 59 and a half years old. But those are really nice. And 457s are also usually a lower fee than like a 403b or a 401k. So thank your employer for offering you a 457. All right, any other questions? I didn't see, the max to a 457 is $20,500 in 2022. And the other thing about a 457 is that if your employer contributes to your 457, that will count against the employer or the max. Whereas a 401k and a 403b, your employer match does not count against your max of $20,500. So keep that in mind as well. Any other questions? We still made it to like the time cap. I'm impressed. I was a little worried there at the end.
Awesome. There was actually one question that was in the chat, but this was earlier when you were referring to the budget, Chloe.
Mhm.
And I think the answer to this is yes, but I figured I would just toss the question out there. She asked if you were putting the, like, in the budget spreadsheet, you're putting the 401k or 403b or whatever your retirement fund is. You add that in there as well?
No, so
Oh yeah, are you counting the 401k or 457 or 403b in the spreadsheet?
we are not counting that in spreadsheet because this is your take-home cash. This is money that's coming into your bank. This is not like, you don't have to worry about the stuff that's coming out of your 457 or 403b.
Got it. I just saw that pop up while you were talking, so I thought I'd make sure we asked it.
Yeah, for sure.
Great, awesome. Any other questions from everyone? I don't see anything popping up. I don't want to take away Margaret's limelight, but Chloe, thank you so much for being a part of this, for starting to think of the Women Pulmonary Program with Margaret and Carolyn and all of our amazing ladies that are on our work group. This is a part of a whole wellness webinar series that we are going to be starting. Obviously, we kicked it off today with International Women's Day. I will be doing one probably about every quarter throughout 2022. And then we'll have, of course, yay, in person, our Women in Pulmonary Luncheon and Workshop that will take place on Monday afternoon at Chest in Nashville. So we hope to see many of you there. We'll be bringing diversity travel grants back this year since we're traveling. Well, like fingers crossed, hopefully traveling this year. And we can't do any of these programming and or grant offerings without support from donors. So please consider making a donation to the Chest Foundation, and we can make sure that it goes to the Women in Pulmonary Program. Margaret, any last few?
No, I just want to say thank you everyone for being here, and a big thanks to the Chest Foundation and Women in Pulmonary for supporting this, for Chloe for taking the time to do this for us. And so I look forward to the things that this group is going to do moving forward. And so thanks everybody. Chloe, there's one last question in the chat that maybe you can type an answer to.
I cannot see my.
I can read it to you, Chloe.
Okay.
It says, I've been told to invest into highest risk accounts with this inflation. What are your thoughts?
It totally depends on you and your time horizon. So if you are 50 years old and within 15 years of retirement, that's probably not the best advice. But if you're 20 years old or you're 30 years old and you've got, decades upon decades to be investing, that's not necessarily the worst advice, but I don't know anything about you, unfortunately. I don't know your risk preference. I don't know what you're going to do when the market like starts to go down and, you might feel some panic and things like that. So it's kind of a more complex question without knowing more about you. But if you've got decades upon decades to ride out the waves of the market, then, personally at 30 years old and 35 years left before I plan to retire, I am doing high risk. I am doing and like moderately high risk. I'm still investing in index funds that personally I consider kind of middle risk, middle reward. But I've got some growth funds in there. I've got some value funds in there. I've got some stuff that would be considered a little bit more aggressive. But again, it just depends on you and your time horizon and as well as your risk preference. So I would definitely make sure you're educating yourself a little bit more before diving into a high risk investment specifically, just because, like I said, if you're investing and you start to see your investments go down, we wouldn't want you to, panic and pull out when your investments are down and things like that. So it all depends on your risk preference.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Chloe, thank you again so much. Margaret, Carolyn, thank you all for your leadership with the program for the Women in Pulmonary group. And we will be in touch soon. Anyone who's registered, we will be sending an email out once the link is live to go to the recording. Please feel free to share with others because I think this is really valuable information. And one of my biggest goals is to always build women up. So let's keep on doing that. So thanks very much. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.